The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To Mr. Jordan's point, we're beset with problems. Two of the most significant are that the producer price index is at 10%. We face a cost environment that is unsustainable and that affects every American's livelihood every time they visit a gas pump or go to the store. We face an employment environment where Americans have been disincentivized to work. Every time I speak to people in my district, well, maybe different in the last couple of weeks in the latest catastrophes we've seen, but certainly until then, the leading concern is the availability of people who are inclined to work in order to fulfill job opportunities. The Judiciary Committee's report on this legislation points out that I and Representative Cliff Bentz from Oregon raised the question about this legislation in the markup that it may prevent employers from regulating hairstyles for workplace safety reasons. If one of the cases involved, I believe, was about long dreadlocks that could become ensnared in machinery on a workplace floor. Let me tell you what the Judiciary Committee's report by the majority says is the answer to that problem. They say that concern is misplaced because under the long-standing burden-shifting scheme applied by courts in Title VII cases, an employer may defeat a discrimination claim by asserting that workplace safety was a legitimate, non-discriminatory reason for taking an adverse employment action against an employee, with the burden then shifting to the employee to prove that the asserted reason was a pretext for discrimination. Assuming the employee cannot demonstrate that the employer's assertion of workplace safety was pretextual, the employer would prevail against an employment discrimination claim. How extraordinarily comforting. So if the employee wants to wear dreadlocks and an employer is legitimately concerned for the health and safety of the employee that his scalp might be ripped off by a machine, then the employer can enter into the litigation. And it certainly couldn't be arbitrated. We took care of that yesterday, right on the floor of the House. We got to have litigation. We'll have expensive lawyers. We'll get the complaint filed, the answer filed. Maybe there'll be a motion to dismiss that'll be denied. We'll get into the discovery process. We'll send out the interrogatories and the document requests. We'll ask for the other occasions where somebody's been fired, examine the process and the practices of the employer for the last decade. We'll get some experts in. We got to have some experts to come in and testify the likelihood that the long dreadlocks are going to get caught in the machinery. We'll have conflicting experts, each on each side. They'll disagree. And then the court will receive a motion for summary judgment. Say, is there enough evidence to submit the case to trial? And the court will the judge will have a 130-page opinion that'll examine the burden-shifting scheme and the initial burden, and then the response burden, and the burden shifts to the employee to show pretext. And the inflation rate creeps higher, and the folks willing to enter into jobs seem to be less and less, and the catastrophes keep coming. But this is the top priority. I don't think we need to drive lawsuits between Americans. I think in the main, Americans well understand the rules of the road. As the Judiciary Committee itself reports, courts have generally even recognized that hairstyle, to the extent it's associated with race, as a basis for decisions on employment or the like is already unlawful. The EEOC's own manual says that discriminating on the basis of, for example, afros is unlawful. Another solution to a problem that doesn't exist in any significant scope in this country, and the result being inflation that gets higher, more supply constriction that drives inflation higher, more animosity and obstacles between employees and employers, between merchants and customers, to drive more lawsuits, to pay more lawyers, to make the quality of life in America so much better. That's where we are. That's where we are today on the floor of the House. I yield back.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
It's not a question of avoidance, it's a question of priority. Here's a priority. In 2020, homicides across America increased 30%, from 16,005 roughly to 21,005, an additional 5,000 homicides. And even if you want to view it through a racial lens, since that seems to be the subject, 55% of homicides are suffered by black Americans, even though they make up 13% of the population. Of the increase I just described, black Americans suffer 65%. So we could have, if the minority were capable of bringing a bill to the floor, we could bring a bill that would address the rising crime in America. The historically exceptional, historically unprecedented, I believe, at least I saw something since maybe the 1900 or 1902, I don't know what the circumstances were then, but since then, the highest increase of homicides in a single year in the history of the United States, grossly disproportionately borne by black Americans, driven by rhetoric about defunding police. We could prioritize that. That wouldn't be avoidance. And yet we do not. Because indeed we are in the minority. And the priorities are being set not by the minority but the majority. I yield back.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. Jordan, to the point just made, it does strike me that what is being described even by the majority leader or by the chairman of the Judiciary Committee is that some courts in the hundreds of federal courts that we have, I'm not even sure they're all federal that they're describing, but I assume so, have decided that this is not an issue that's covered or under one of the more of these laws. But you know what usually happens is the Congress waits for the court system to work this out to the United States Supreme Court, and when there's a decision there, if the decision is contrary to the intent of Congress, Congress responds. So again, in terms of picking up something that's unnecessary, that's what the majority is doing. It's not Republicans who bring the bill to the floor. It's not Republicans who pick a fight over something that most wouldn't even disagree about, except in circumstances of safety. And then the question becomes one of the degree of burden imposed on employers, whether you want to drive lawsuits. As you said, if maybe I was thinking as Mr. Jordan was speaking that it would be nice to bring, since we have, minority can get issues to the floor. I didn't know that. I've been here just since 2019. We've been in the minority the whole time. And boy, I can think of a lot of things we could bring to the floor. We should bring a bill to unleash American energy independence. We really need that right now. Not just a bill cutting off imports from Russia, not just a bill driving prices higher so that Americans will not only be paying $4 and $5 thanks to Joe Biden at the pump, but they'll soon be paying $6, $7, $8 at the pump. We could bring a bill to the floor, if the minority could do it, we could bring a bill to the floor that would say, let's open up the ability to drill. Let's encourage the energy industry in America to produce the energy that the world needs so that prices will be low and that Americans across the board, not just a few who have these extraneous handful of cases out of the whole federal court system in which the result has not turned out the way we would like it to have turned out. Let's worry about millions and millions of Americans who have to pay $7 or $8 at the pump every day soon. $4 or $5 now. That would be what I would do if the minority could bring something to the floor. With that, I yield back, Mr. Jordan.